Hi everyone. It's been a while since I made a video, so if you're coming back after having seen one or two of the others, I'm really glad you did. And if this is the first video of mine that you've seen, thank you for joining me for this and checking it out. So this is the first video. This is number 26 of the ones I've made in the last 6 weeks or so. And it's the first one that I've made specifically about my own type, ENFP. And I think that it's a bit significant. I think it's a bit relevant and says something about me and says something about ENFP that I waited so long to make one that is about my own business primarily. I think that speaks, in my case anyway, it speaks of a rather usually unseen or underappreciated, I mean that in the neutral sense, qualities of ENFP. And I'm going to talk about what those are and why they're so hard to understand, if you can even perceive them at all. And upon a casual glance, say. And I'm going to get into some of that. But there are a lot of sides of ENFP that are probably a lot deeper and more emotional and more private than our constant chitter chat and high energy and high passion would have you believe. And our tendency to be running around and getting into all kinds of things all the time. So I'm going to talk about some of those things today. And this will probably be just part one of, I don't know how many parts, 2, 3 perhaps, about these ENFP specific topics. But I'm going to get as much as I can out in a watchable amount of time today, and then we'll see what comments, questions, and feedback come in, and I'm sure that will shape in some way how I proceed after that. So the other thing I have to do is a little bit of a disclaimer here, and that is by saying that I have ADHD, which if you know people with ADHD, if you have ADHD, if you love people who have ADHD, that might have been incredibly obvious. I don't know. I think I'm a very obvious specimen for those who actually understand what the disorder is. Most people don't. The ignorance, the general population, and even in the medical profession, the ignorance and misinformation about what this disorder actually is and what it actually does and what it actually looks like. The ignorance is unbelievable in 2016. So blah, 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 blah. But I will say, here's what I'll say that's kind of significant. Before I disclose to someone that I have that disorder, I quite often will, half come out about it and kind of soft pedal a little bit by saying that I am an ENFP deluxe. And the reason for that, I think there's a very good reason for that. And this also will explain why I think you should still listen to, I still think my point of view on ENFP related stuff is still totally valid and still totally applies, despite the fact I have ADHD, because in a sense, and again, we can get into this, I can explain all this later if anybody wants, but in a sense, you could say that all ENFP people are could be considered subclinical or subclinical, i.e., very highly functioning, but people with ADHD. When you look at some of the Hallmark symptoms, many of the Hallmark symptoms, they read like a bullet point list of what ENFP is. So, for example, distractible, I'm very distractible. Creative thinking, I'm very creative thinking. Very messy and disorganized, has a tendency to be. Check. To put it mildly. Oh, God. Really chatty and talkative and easy to approach. Very much so. That's the feedback I've been getting my entire life constantly. What else? Very warm and emotional and tending to champion the underdog. Absolutely, do that like crazy. So these are all things shared by that are common. Not that every person with ADHD has those qualities, but they are known. Many of them are known to have many of those qualities to an uncommonly high degree. So there. So everything that I'm going to say about ENFP, it should be just in the interest of truth and clarity. It should be noticed that, when I get really passionate about things, when I get really chatty about things, when I get really making huge associative leaps, that I, struggle to keep everybody coming along with me and doing, that's why. That's what's happening. But I do believe that if you were to turn it down, just turn all those qualities down a little bit in their intensity, what you would still have is a garden variety ENFP, looking at me and my stuff and the stories I have to tell that are related to it. I think a lot of other ENFPs will be able to relate to a lot of what I say. But we'll see. Let's see. I invite your feedback, ENFPs. This is the first one for us, in a way. So I really look forward to what you have to say. And if you relate to this, or what else you would do or add or whatever, let's have it hopping. I'm sure it will be in the comment section. So, all right, let's take a look at the basics of ENFP. The cognitive stack for ENFP has extroverted intuition in the dominant position. It has introverted feeling in the auxiliary or second slot position. It has tertiary TE, extroverted thinking, in the third slot. And then in the inferior or fourth slot down, it has introverted sensing. So what I'm going to look at particularly today are just the two most influential functions, the dominant extroverted intuition and the auxiliary introverted feeling, because while the other two are also very important, they are not nearly the same strength, nor have nearly the same influence most of the time in sort of regular times in an ENFP's life. The inferior function will come into play more when we're under a tremendous amount of stress, or when we have to really draw on it to pull something off that's really important to us, or whatever. Under some special circumstances, it will come more to the fore. But mainly what you're seeing a lot of the time with ENFPs, what you're going to be seeing, massive evidence of every 5 minutes is the FI and the NE. So can't really get away from those. I'm going to look at those. And I also think that those are the two that, it makes sense, them being so influential, but also for other reasons, I think those are the two that are the most confusing for people. The most confusing for ENFPs ourselves for certain times in our lives, and particularly when we're young, I think, and also confusing to others perpetually who don't know anything about the Myers-Briggs. Thank you, Myers-Briggs. Thank you. Thank you for making this system, because we are one of those types that, again, despite our nonstop talking and our very frequent self-reference, I think we're a pretty misunderstood type as well. Not nearly as much so as the introverted creative thinking IN types, but there's a lot about ENFP that is important and not that obvious. So I hope to raise some awareness about what those things are, what those qualities are back there behind the curtain. All right, so let's look at the dominant function in ENFP. That will be extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition, being extroverted in its attitude, has a kind of outward focus. It takes as its quarry, especially what goes on in the external world. And thanks to the fact that in ENFP, the auxiliary function is a feeling function, that sort of helps direct where that NE attention goes. And that means that where it very often goes and very easily goes is towards any sort of matters that concern humans. So anything having to do with their intrapersonal reality and their interpersonal reality, that's where ENFPs are going to be endlessly interested in what's going on. So what's going on with people psychologically, what's going on between people in terms of communications and sociology, trends in behavior, all that kind of thing. We're going to be very, very interested in that stuff. And usually if proper development and maturation of our top two functions have not been impeded by life circumstances, and if we have worked them a bit, we tend to be really, really good in the things that are associated with that. So some of the qualities that are ascribed very often to ENFPs are that we are very, very warm people. And that's usually very obvious. We're right out on display. A lot of what there is to see about us. There is a real kind of what you see is what you get, a whizzy-widgy that is apparent in our type. And we are really known for being able to create an almost instantaneous. I should this needs to be qualified. I should say that for those who don't run screaming from us, and there are a lot of people who would, because we have this dominant creative thinking function that has an extroverted attitude towards it. What that means too with ENFP is that, and this is the same is true for ENTP, that the fact that we are very, very unconventional people and we're very, very creative thinking people, that means that is right on the outside, and we can try and hide it, and some of us hide it quite well, and it's good for us to be able to hide it. That's a useful skill to have. If you're trying to work in much more sort of straight environments, for example, and earn your living, it doesn't do you any favors to look like this, really. Let's just say that if you look like this in the corporate environment, well, you better be running that multi-billion-dollar company, and you must be given credit by hundreds of thousands for, all your brilliant ideas being the reason that company is doing so well, because that's the level of justification it would take to get anyone to take you even the tiniest bit seriously enough to be employable in that world. So that stuff's really on display, and so that means that a lot of people, I think, particularly the S-J types, are likely to run from us because we look too weird and we're not to their taste, and we don't look like their kind of people. But they're exceptions, and ENFPs are kind of famous for being able to get along with people, to very, very quickly spend a short period of time with someone that we don't know, and to tell all kinds of things about them in a very short period of time, because of all of this experience we've built up socially, and because of the constant scanning of the external environment and looking for meaning and looking for patterns in it, especially as pertains to people and social interactions. So we like to relate to people on their own level. We aren't just good at that usually. We're often very good at it, and we really love to do it, because when we are doing that, we're kind of drawing on all kinds of faculties that we have, and we enjoy doing it, just like anybody enjoys doing things they're good at. We enjoy doing that. So. And we're very outgoing usually. We can be very shy. Remember that shyness and introversion are not necessarily overlapping at all. And I know that has surprised a lot of people to know that sometimes I feel painfully shy, thanks to my FI influence, I think, mainly. But it would be hard to tell. Again, shyness is a state of mind primarily. It's a feeling, whereas introversion is kind of a way of living, overall, to keep one's own energy balanced correctly. So those are different things. Anyway, so that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see with an ENFP right away. And so, those people that are, it tends to be the case that people who like ENFPs at all tend to like us a lot. We're like the old, for those of us old enough to remember those, I used to say those almond mound chocolate bar ads from way, way back, where they said, I really think that's my tagline anyway. Like those who like me, like me a lot. And that's the kind of feedback that I'm used to having. And then there are plenty of people who are just like, woo, no, thank you. And that's fine. And we don't really meet. Going back to the cognitive functions, I got off track there. So extroverted intuition, really what that is in essence is in the dominant position, it means that you've got this massive creative thinking going on that is focused. The sort of power of it is focused on the external environment and what's happening in the external environment. What NE does is creates very quickly webs of association, almost instantaneously sometimes. And again, maybe I'm a little more prone, maybe in my case it's a little bit extreme because of the ADHD, but I know that this is also true of all ENFPs. For example, I had to laugh when I saw an interview with Dario Nardi, the INTJ neurological researcher who has been doing EKG scans of the brains of people of different types to see if they're seeing, what correlations or what patterns emerge in that data that could be correlated to type. And I remember seeing him speak a couple of times about how, for those who have dominant extroverted intuition, that would be the ENTPs and the ENFPs. He said that he sees a pattern so far in there. It's a pretty small study sample, I think, so far, but what they've seen so far across the board in that sample is that the pattern of where the brain, there seems to be intense brain activity, there's electrical activity that can be seen going on in the brain. He said it's a very unique pattern that's not like any of the other 14 types. And again, I had to laugh. He said that when you give someone with extroverted intuition a problem to work on, and again, he's a dominant intuitive too, but the introverted intuition, like the INFJs, the INTJs have. And he said that when you see an ENTP or an ENFP's brain, when a problem has been given to it to solve, he said he said it in this lovely metaphorical way. He said, it's as if the brain were a house. It's as if there's a person running throughout that whole house, just flicking all the lights on in every room and like upending couches and looking down underneath tables and behind chairs and all over the damn place to come up with hundreds of little bits of information from everywhere to bring it all together to form a composite as a solution. And I thought that, he said, it's like the whole brain is lit up like a Christmas tree. In most of the other 14 types, this part's really active, this part's a little bit active, these two parts are oscillating in activity. Beside the ENTP or the ENF brain is completely lit up like a Christmas tree. That was so funny, and I couldn't wait to tell my other, ENFP and ADHD friends about that, because we'll all, that's how it feels for us too. So that's really, it's quite interesting and kind of neat to find that the neuroimaging is showing that. So that's it. You've got this function that's really, really energetic, really divergent in thinking, and that sees patterns and connects things very, very quickly. And what it's doing is looking for meaning. It's looking for meaning, and it's very often finding it. And it can be quite exhausting. In fact, it's the experience of having NE. And again, in my case, it's going to be kind of extreme, but I know a lot of other ENFPs can relate to this too, and ENTPs can. It's a state, in my case, it's a state that if I don't have to get anything done, that's a big if. If I don't have to get anything done, if I don't have to focus right down, I find it to be very pleasurable to surf around on that cognitive function. It's kind of a blast because it can bring up just about anything. It's very far-reaching. And again, as has been described by lots of other fantastic YouTube lecturers on MBTI stuff, what NE does, very, very different from what NI, introverted intuition, does. Introverted intuition, it sort of has this, anyway, whatever. I'm not going to talk about them today for a change. Not so much. But what the NE does is it covers a whole lot of ground, but to a rather shallow, it's got a lot of breadth as opposed to depth. And the brain activity that Dario Nardo was speaking of, I've since heard another lecture I'm going to recommend soon about NE. It says it's transversal in quality. So again, you've got the whole brain searching all over the place, all kinds of places that most people would not even begin to think to look for the solution. The NE dominant brain is doing that. And it's doing it fast, and it's using a lot of energy to do it. And basically all the other faculties are just racing and racing to try and keep up with the amount of mostly what will end up being just garbage. It's not going to be useful at all. It's going to be a lark. But we're going to cover a lot of ground very quickly, very quickly, very quickly. And we're going to scan, and think, this is interesting, this could be interesting, this could be interesting, this could be interesting. And we're going to generate a shit ton of possibilities in a very short period of time. The ENTP and the ENFP are supreme at brainstorming. And if you look at what is connected, what is the sort of opposite and at the bottom of our cognitive function stack, that would be introverted sensing. You can see how it is that to the more that we're using our dominant function, which we naturally will be using really often, the more we're using it, the less we are keeping track of what SI is associated with by definition. SI is all about like facts and ordering the system and making sure that everything's in place and cleaning everything up and making it all tidy and putting in its little boxes where it belongs. What NE is doing in the dominant position is it is exploding everything all the time. It is trying to open up as many things as possible. So that's, again, it is very different from the introverted intuition process. Again, there's a hell of a lot to say about that cognitive function that is the dominant in INTJ and INFJ. But from what I understand, with those two, what's happening is that intuition is sort of causing them to look at a very interesting array and probably a very novel and unusual array of options that their very deep cognitive function has, in ways mysterious even to them, has sort of brought up into their mind to think of. But they're sort of, with the J and the other influences in those two types, and also this is a thrust of IN as well, of to try and narrow it down and consolidate. So to look at a bunch of interesting options, but then to narrow it down to the one truth, if that's possible. Whereas what is natural for the NE brain to do is kind of the opposite. It's to take nothing for granted as absolute. It's to assume that nothing is absolute and nothing is fixed, and to proceed from that basis. And to not stop doing that until we hit the brick wall, conceptually or in fact, we will run into that wall before we're willing to acknowledge that it's there. Because what we're interested in doing and good at doing and driven to do is to open everything up for question and to just turn the stones over, and usually quite gleefully. It's kind of a blast for us. That's what we love to do. And we're kind of friskily running around in the field of ideas and trying to consider as many as we can, almost with a stopwatch going. So it can seem very chaotic. It also can seem, when presented very quickly or with too much energy behind it from us, it can be very overwhelming for others to even hear about. But dominant extroverted intuition is a great thing to access in someone if you feel like maybe you've been a bit too hasty to narrow down your options, or if you've got a real toughie of a problem and you could really use a fresh perspective on it, and you could use someone who is guaranteed to come up with 500 new ideas, most of which are completely ridiculous, okay? Most of them are going to be totally ridiculous, totally unusable, and very few will be even practicable at all, and then even fewer still will be, the thing to do. But if you bring us into a meeting and have us barf out all of our crazy ideas that we can think of, and we can think of a lot of them in a very short period of time, then it might be some good, give you a nice pile of material to kind of sort through. That's where you want the more J people in, the IJ people probably particularly, to come in and then sift through that shit and be like, yeah, no way, not feasible. Oh, this might be feasible, and then like make the feasible pile, then make the feasible and probably pretty good pile, and then, to winnow it down. But the thing is, it can be useful to have us use our dominant function that way. in the service of a project, or in terms of counseling someone, or because we're generating possibilities, and we're really, really good at that. And in this big mess, or these big webs of associated ideas that we may have that seem utterly bizarre, even to us. I mean, we crack ourselves up constantly, and the stuff we think of, really, it's really weird. It's a weird and fun place to be in here. Again, when you don't have a lot of time pressure. And you don't have to deal with a bunch of drudgy stuff, which is, that's life. You got to do that stuff. But when you are free to not do those things or not be worried about them, then a dominant extroverted intuitive's brain is a very fun and lively place to be. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. And anything can change in half a second and go in another direction. It will go in multiple directions at once. There's just a remarkable plurality and divergence in the thinking in these types, ENTP and ENFP. But boy, it's a lot to handle, guys. But anyway, I was going to say, so yeah, let us barf out all of our ideas, most of which are going to be terrible. Some of which are going to be hilarious, for sure. Some of them are just weird, like just absolutely bizarre. But the thing is, there might be a couple, there's very likely, though, in a big pile of our ideas, there's very likely to be a couple of scraps in there there are definitely going to be some that are usable and occasionally brilliant. So again, I feel like our dominant function is one that it's harder to appreciate what it's good for than some of the other ones. Like, for example, TE, when you've got that dominant function, as is the case in ENTJ, for example. You've got TE, that's a very, obviously it's a very rational and intelligent and quick thinking and good at delegating, good at organizing, good at making executive decisions very quickly, and getting things rolling, getting things on the road. So that is a dominant function. That's easy to see why, that dominant functions, the fruits of that dominant function are very easy to appreciate, very easy for most people to appreciate. It's very easy to see where someone with that dominant function, if it's developed well, and then the other qualities to balance it are also developed well, you can see why that's a very useful person, and pretty much anyone can appreciate why that person is very useful. NE dominant, yeah, it really depends. It depends on what you've done with it in this world. Because there are plenty of people who would have a very hard time, because of their bend of mind, they would have a very hard time relating to it, and they'd have a very hard time seeing what usefulness it has. The way I see it, NE has to be put it has to find its niche, and it needs to be put in the service of other things, bigger projects with many other details that are handled by other people in the main, I would say, too. Because let's face it, there's a price to be paid when you've got a brain like that. And ENTPs and EFPs, we are not known, again, to put it mildly, we are not known for our extraordinary powers of organization and punctuality and ability to do everything in a timely, orderly, linear fashion. In fact, not to say many of us do learn how to do that and do those things very well, but it takes a lot out of us. That is, none of those things come naturally to us whatsoever. So, unless, again, we're having a total mental breakdown, in which case, in ENFP's case, the SI will come to the fore, and we'll be doing our taxes for fun at that point because we've completely lost our minds. But in regular time, we are not going to be putting the spice rack in alphabetical order. Let's just put it that way. So, all right, auxiliary function for ENFP, that is introverted feeling. Introverted feeling. Okay, so introverted feeling is famous for being a very emotionally sensitive function when it's high up in the cognitive stack. Anywhere in the cognitive stack, but when it's in the auxiliary or the dominant position, you are de facto dealing with someone who's a very emotionally sensitive and very emotionally intense person. That's just that's a given. It also is a function which causes, again, when it's high in the cognitive stack, you could see my other videos on that if you want to know more about it. But it means that the person too has a very has a value system that is very, very important to them, and that was arrived at probably according to processes that were probably more independent than in many other types. For example, there are some types where the sort of locus of morality is kind of outside of the self. Maybe there's some like the super FE users who have the sensor preference for information gathering. For those people, the morality is largely determined by the group that they're in. We are the opposite of that. The INFP, all the FPs. We have a value system that is rather is something that we can't get away from even when we want to. It's just always there. It's just always there. It's always there, making itself known, making itself felt. It's a judging function, so it's one that we have to listen to when making decisions. It always has to give its 2 cents somewhere. It also means that the value systems of FI people are relatively impervious to outside influence. Not to say you certainly can influence someone with FI in all kinds of ways, depending on all kinds of things that the MBTI model doesn't even seek to try and account for, but also according to MBTI associated qualities. But let's just say that it's probably pretty difficult. It would have to take quite an alignment of very powerful, very influential forces to cause an FI person to have one of their values significantly altered or dislodged or rendered silent, shall we say, because of an outside influence. So this is something that we live with. This is something that's always going on as well, and is not as easy to see as the NE business is for us. So I'm going to stop here. I think this is good for part 1. I'm going to continue with part 2 in just a moment.